Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Mario Cristobal, the Miami Hurricanes, working their way through spring practice. And it seems like at this point, every time I open up and read the spring practice notes, I kind of get another storyline I want to talk about. And I think the big takeaway after the first couple of practices for the Miami Hurricanes is these year two defensive linemen are really coming into their own going into 2025. And I think that is probably one of the most underrated storylines around this Miami Hurricanes defense, where you really got two big storylines, right? Corey Heatherman coming in as your defensive coordinator, in this secondary getting better in 2025. And it might be just as important as this secondary getting better, of which I'm very confident it is because the personnel is just way better than it was last year. Another big storyline is your defensive line and being dominant on the line of scrimmage, specifically on the defensive side of the football. What is the best way to take pressure off a secondary that's going to have some new faces? It's having an elite pass rush. This is a conversation that we had with Georgia a couple of years ago where Kirby Smart was so adamant that he was not confident in his secondary going into the 2021 year. And it really just didn't matter because teams could not throw on the Georgia Bulldogs because they couldn't block Georgia up front. And I look at the personnel that Miami has on the defensive line heading into 2025 and all the resources that Mario Cristobal has poured into this unit. I'm kind of looking at Miami and saying, this is a sneaky defensive line that really could be dominant in the 2025 year. And I start looking at ACC offensive lines that can block Miami. I don't know how many there are. And so just as big of a storyline as the secondary getting better, I think is the storyline of this defensive line not only being good, it was a good unit last year. Can it go be great in 2025? That is another really intriguing conversation. Want to get into some names that are standing out. Want to talk about a few other depth chart updates that we have as well. Before we get into it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and to the Miami Hurricane fans. It's middle of March, whether we're talking spring ball, whether we're talking the recruiting trail, the amount of support y'all have thrown in the comment section has been absolutely amazing. It is going to be really fun talking to this team as they put on the pads going into the next couple of weeks of spring practice. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. And I want to start with not only the defensive line being really dominant, but can this defensive line be really deep as well? And I often think that, especially in this modern era of college football where the transfer portal is so present, it's really hard to hold on to your depth pieces. And I think Mario Cristobal has done a great job doing so. I mean, you look at a guy like Ahmad Moten, who would probably start on 95% of Power Four college football teams going into 2025, holding on to guys like Ahmad Moten, that's huge. And Mario Cristobal did a really good job doing so. And I kind of have this conversation of, all right, how can Miami take the step on the defensive side of the football? It comes down to two things. One, I mean, we know Ruben Bain and guys like Akeem Mesidor, we know they're gamers. We know what they can do because we've seen it with our own two eyes. But I think the second storyline is, can these young guys on the defensive line not only emerge as depth pieces, but emerge as guys that can really wreck games for this Miami Hurricanes defense going into the 2025 year? And the two names that, whatever service that you're using to get your spring practice intel, the two names that are consistently popping up, Justin Scott and Armondo Blount, two guys that we were extremely excited about heading into 2024. Now, neither of them played a ton. One, Justin Scott was a guy that didn't come in until the summer. Armondo Blount was a reclassified guy who was 17 years old. There is reason to believe that Justin Scott, with his first real winter conditioning period in spring practice, and Armondo Blount just becoming an actual legal adult, I think he can say, hey, these guys are going to take steps going into 2025, specifically Armondo Blount, who is reportedly big time power in the mitts and a really, really smooth athlete. And that's what made Armondo Blount so special coming out of high school, whereas this kid that you weren't really sure where he was going to play, whether he was going to stay on the edge or kick inside. But the two things you knew from Armondo Blount is the combination between the power that this kid had and the athleticism was so tough for offensive linemen to deal with. And it sounds like Armondo Blount is kind of becoming the defensive lineman that we thought he was going to be coming out of high school. That's a huge storyline because you start counting 8, 9 guys that you're fired up about for Miami going into 2025. You have that top end NFL talent, guys like Ruben Bain, but you're also becoming really deep. And I look at, the past national championship caliber football teams, back to Georgia 2021 and 2022, Michigan in 2023, Ohio State in 2024. All of those teams had in common not only really good defensive lines, but really deep defensive lines. And when it comes to winning games in November, and when it comes to making runs in the college football playoffs, it's a long season. And you want to be able to rotate as many big bodies as you can along the defensive line. And it really seems like with the emergence of Justin Scott, in the emergence of Armondo Blount, in the emergence of a freshman in Hayden Lowe, who it just seems like is going to play a lot for Miami in 2025, this unit is really deep as much as it is talented. And that's a really big conversation for Miami fans. Now, the one question mark I might have is on the inside of the defensive line, where you feel good about David Blay. You feel good about Justin Scott. You feel really good about Ahmad Moten, my personal favorite. Outside of those three, like who is going to step up? It could be Artavius Jones. It could be a guy like Josh Horton. I think that's probably what you're looking for the rest of the way. Is, all right, do we have enough big bodies in the middle of the defensive line to be a deep and talented unit? I'm starting to feel really good about the edge rushers. How good are we on the middle of the defensive line? And again, this defensive line, I should say, can become the unit I think it can be on paper, that's a huge storyline for the overall defense and a huge storyline for the secondary. Again, the best way to take some pressure off a secondary is have an elite pass rush. And you go back to 2024, it wasn't bad. And sacking the quarterback 7.1% of the time, that was 44th in the country. It's not bad, but it's not elite. Can we make that jump to go be elite in 2025? That's the conversation. Number two, the linebacker competition, it's stiff, and I think this has a lot to do with Corey Heatherman finding what he wants in his off-ball linebackers. That I feel really good about Wesley Bassane starting, playing good football. He's been quietly really, really steady for Miami the last couple of years. Who's the other guy? You're starting to hear some really good things about Jalen Alderman, who wasn't necessarily the guy that we went into spring practice talking about, because we were talking about Bobby Pruitt, Darius Hayes, Kellen Wiley. But having another veteran kind of emerge, I think's a really good storyline. And then if you can have Bobby Pruitt or a guy like Popo or a guy like Kellen Wiley emerge and push a guy like Jalen Alderman, you feel good about the linebacker spot. But, overall, I continue to say it's just a more athletic room than it was last year. And that's huge because Miami struggled at times when teams attacked them out on the perimeter. You just didn't have the linebackers to go run and chase. Number three, going to the offensive side of the football, again, that does not matter what spring practice report you read. Malachi Toney is going to be that guy. The thing that stood out to me about Malachi Toney coming out of the last couple of spring practices, he's getting a lot of work in special teams as a punt returner. That many of y'all are probably looking at me like, all right, why does that matter? Well, why I think it matters is that tells you this coaching staff has a lot of trust in Malachi Toney. You don't throw a true freshman out there to return punts if you do not trust that they're going to go out and execute. And so the trust that they're putting in him to go return punts, I think is probably going to play a role in the trust that they have to put him as a wide receiver and go do the right things. That's what it comes down to, a true freshman getting on the football field. We know Malachi Toney has all the traits, the explosiveness, the long speed, the short area quickness, the hands. He has everything to get on the football field as a freshman. Now it comes down to, does this staff, to Shannon Dawson, as Mario Cristobal, do they trust Malachi Toney to go out and execute? And having him return punch, that's telling me that they got a lot of trust in this kid. And he seems to be the freshman. Him and Hayden Lowe seem to be the two freshmen that you probably expect to have a big-time impact on this Miami Hurricanes football team. And number four, Ryan Rodriguez. He might be the starting left guard for Miami, which is a big change. I mean, we kind of assumed that maybe Matt McCoy would be the guy, and that very well might be the case. Ryan Rodriguez, taking a lot of one reps, I think is intriguing too. And one of the things with the offensive line is It's a really deep unit. It's a really good unit. And Shannon Dawson noted that, where it's like nobody really talked about the offensive line because everybody talked about Cam Ward. It's been the strength of Miami for the last 2 years. And I expect it to be the strength of Miami going into 2025. And the more good intel you get about this offensive line, the more good intel you get about a guy like Jordan Lyle, the better you feel about Miami running the football really well in 2025, which we all think is going to be a really big storyline. And one of the things that stands out to me about that, Miami running the football is you probably avoid getting into some of these barn burner games that Miami always seem to find themselves in the 2024 year. When you can run the football, dictate how fast the game is played, control the time possession, you avoid getting into these shootouts where it's like whoever has the ball last wins. And it felt like Miami found themselves in that spot a lot, and Cam Ward bailed them out a lot. You probably don't want to be in as many one-score games as you were in the 2024 year. One way you can do that is, hey, we're going to dominate up front. We're going to run the football, control the time possession, and control how the game is played. And then you kind of avoid sweating out in the fourth quarter against teams that you probably shouldn't be sweating against. It continues to just be a lot of intriguing storylines. They're going to go on spring break now, put on the pads as they come back next week. That's going to be even more exciting. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.